Hello and welcome along. We're going to talk about Isstvan III today. So this is a pivotal moment in the Heresy because it is essentially the first overt action that Horus takes in the Heresy. Horus is revealing his hand by what he does at Isstvan III. Before this, he was doing things in the background, plotting, maneuvering, etc. But this is when he first is visible to the wider Imperium that he's doing something traitorous. And it's here that he makes his first major mistakes. So we're going to look a little bit more about what happened to Isstvan III and what mistakes Horus made, which made the course of the heresy so much harder for him than it otherwise would have been. So at this stage, Horus has been corrupted by chaos, and as has Fulgrim, and together with Angron and Mortarion, they've gone to Isstvan III, seemingly to put down a rebellion. Now, the planetary governor of the planet has turned to chaos and is being corrupted by Slaanesh. So this is before the understanding of even the existence of chaos, let alone how it works, what it does, has come to light. So all that is known in the Imperium is this governor has rebelled, and this is Baron Vardus Praal, and he has turned from the Imperium. He needs to be brought back in line. And Horus is sent to do this, and he's sent with his own legion plus the 3 legions of the Primarchs that are with him. Now that's a massive force, so it's a huge force if you think about that. 4 whole legions under the direct command of the War Master. So that is a massive statement by the Imperium to actually put down this rebellion with such an overwhelming force. Now, of course, the real reason behind this is Horus wants to have an excuse for getting these legions in one place and purging the loyalist elements from these legions. So even within these 4 sort of core traitor legions, there were still many people that just wouldn't turn from the Emperor. And they had been slowly picked out by the others in the legions over time and just noted that these people were the ones you were never going to get to turn. So they were never told about even the idea of turning against the Emperor, because it was clear from their personalities and from certain little hints and questions and so on that had been made over the years that they were never going to be able to be brought over to the side of the traitors. Whereas the traitors all basically had been selected because they had revealed themselves to be open to the idea through the warrior lodges. Now, the warrior lodges were deeply embedded in these 4 legions, and so the people that attended these warrior lodges spoke outside of the normal restrictions of rank and so on. They had revealed themselves to be potential traitors. That there was something about them, some openness in the way that they thought that meant that they could question the idea that the Emperor was infallible, essentially, the ultimate authority, and that there was room in there to start to bring them over to the idea of actually betraying the Emperor. Now, you can imagine that's a long process, because this is so deeply ingrained in the Astarte to be loyal to the Emperor that this wasn't a simple task to bring them over to the idea of being traitors. And essentially the way it worked mostly was playing off their loyalty to the Primarch over their loyalty to the Emperor. And eventually some would show that they were more loyal to their Primarch than they were to the Emperor. And that is how they were able to be brought onto the side of the traitors. But others showed that even though they were generally loyal to their Primarch, there was a line that they wouldn't cross, and that the Emperor would always be superior in their mind to the Primarch in terms of deserving their loyalty. So now, once this process had happened over several years and these people had been identified, there needed to be a way of getting them out of the legion, these loyalists. And obviously you don't want to just go, okay, you're fired, off you go and do your own thing, because they're going to come back to haunt you, they're going to fight you, and they're going to reveal your hand because they're going to tell people. So they had to be killed. There was no other way. And so Horus wanted to do it all in one fell swoop, and this was the purpose of Isstvan III. So with the pretense of going to put down this rebellion, he assembles these 4 legions, goes to Isstvan, and seemingly sends down a first wave of an attack force to start defeating these rebels. And so this first wave was, in fact, all of the loyalists, or at least almost entirely all of the loyalists. There were 1 or 2 people who couldn't quite be it was just too suspicious to be able to get them down onto the surface. So a very small number remained on some of the ships in the fleet. Now, a small group of these people would eventually escape at the end of the conflict to go and warn the Imperium. But the vast majority are down on the planet. And equally, there's almost no traitors or potential traitors in this first wave. And so none of the Primocs are throwing away their loyal troops, loyal to them, that is, troops in this first wave. They've kept them back in what is supposed to be a second wave. Now, so the first wave engaged with the rebels. This is a genuine rebellion. So these planetary forces are corrupted by Slaanesh. They start fighting back, and a large battle ensues. And obviously the Astarte force is superior, but they are taking casualties. It's not easy, and they are progressing. So, but as they do this, Horus then makes his next move, which is to virus bomb the planet with his own forces down there. And obviously, this is when those on the planet now see something terrible has happened and they've been betrayed by their own Primarch. Now, one or two of those people on the planet had actually been warned because of the actions of various people that would turn out to be great heroes of the Imperium who had been seeing signs of something untoward happening. They'd started to unravel some of the plots that were going on, and they had just been warned enough. Garviel Loken, who is a member of the Lunar Wolves and a close confidant of Horus as one of his Mournival, to begin to warn people on the planet. So he's been warned what's going to happen by someone else, and then he then spreads that amongst the loyalists and tries to get as many as possible to take cover from this virus bombing that's going to come. Now, some don't even believe that anything's going to happen, so they ignore him. Others just can't be reached. And others, even though they now know something's wrong, can't get to cover. So many do die in the virus bombing. But a reasonable number do find shelter, and enough for it to be a problem for the traitors. So now Horus is in a difficult situation now. His plan hasn't quite worked. Some of the loyalists have survived. So now the obvious thing for him to do is to bombard the planet from orbit and just obliterate them, annihilate anyone left on the planet. And that's what he would have done. But unfortunately for him, one of his key lieutenants is Angron. And so Angron, in a rage, because he's so annoyed by the fact that the people he tried to kill didn't die, he decides he's got to go down there and kill them himself, because they had the temerity to not want to die. So he just decides he's going to take the rest of his legion and go down, performs an orbital assault, lands, and starts immediately assaulting these survivors. This means that Horus can't... Well, he's got a choice. He could still destroy the planet from orbit, but if he does this, he's going to wipe out a large part of his own forces, the now traitor World Eaters, and potentially kill Angron. So he decides, well, I'm going to have to reinforce this attack. Sends down elements of his own Lunar Wolves and Emperor's Children and Death Guard. And so now you've got a full-scale battle going on. The second wave essentially has been sent in, and they're fighting the survivors of that first wave. Now, they still massively outnumber the other side, because if you remember, there were more of them anyway to start off with. There were more traitors within the legions than there were loyalists within these four legions. And a lot of the loyalists died when they were fighting the rebellious planetary governor's forces and then were virus bombed. Then Horus had fired incendiary rounds at the planet to burn it. So all of the decaying flesh has produced a massive cloud of flammable gas, which has then ignited the atmosphere of the planet, burns essentially. There's a massive firestorm, huge hurricanes are caused. It's a devastation beyond imagination. And then these few loyalists have climbed up out of the bunkers that they managed to survive in, and they have to now face the rest of their legions who have come to wipe them out, led by Angron, who is in a furious rage and just goes straight in, launching himself into killing people, mostly his own people. So he specifically is targeting his own World Eaters, who he's most annoyed with that. And obviously, being Angron, he's just smashing through them, annihilating them. But he can only be in one place at any time, and this is quite a wide battlefield that's involving several thousand people, tens of thousands of people. So he can't kill them all on his own. These remnants of loyalists are led by very, very capable individuals in Garviel Loken and Sol Tarvitz, who of the Emperor's Children, who is the man that actually managed to work out what was going on and get down to the surface to warn Loken. they put up an incredible resistance using the ruins, using these massive hurricanes and so on as cover, which also stop a lot of the heavy weapons being brought down by the traitors. They manage to survive, and they fight this kind of guerrilla campaign and just tenacious, dug-in defense, under like tons of concrete and so on of these just demolished buildings. And it takes something like 3 months for the battle to progress to the point where they're almost all dead. The final stages of the battle, there's a final confrontation between the sort of leading characters on both sides, and they duel to the death. And so the battle was over. And although the traitors had won, they had taken enormous losses. So it was a massive Pyrrhic victory for Horus. He had lost tens of thousands of troops that were loyal to him, and he had wasted 3 months of time that he'd expected to have to carry out the early stages of the heresy, trying to eliminate these last few loyalists. So it can't be underestimated just how much of an impact that had on his plans, because this 3 whole months doing something that he thought was going to take a day. He had the attack which should have gone ahead, the virus bombs should have happened, they were all dead, and then they just walk away from the planet. That's it, and they're done. Then he goes on to his next stage of his plan, which was to go to Isstvan V and prepare for the counterattack by the Imperium. But instead, he has to spend all of that time trying to wipe out this last remaining loyalist. It also expended a huge amount of resources, so he just had to keep sending troops in against these infuriatingly stubborn loyalists who just would not die, and somehow were able to constantly outmaneuver the attacks from the traitors. They were always ready for them. They're always counterattacking. They're always slipping away. They understood that all they had to do was to bleed the traitors as much as possible before they died. They had given up on surviving. They had no intention of walking away from this fight. They didn't think they were going to somehow beat the traitors and retake the surface of the planet and then somehow get back to the fleet, take the fleet. That was obviously impossible. So they knew they were going to die, and they had resigned themselves to that. All they were trying to do was frustrate the traitors as much as possible by making it take as long as possible to kill them all, and in the process kill as many of the traitors as they could. And they achieved this to an incredible level, one that could never really have been hoped. And so the traitor legions are estimated to have taken massive losses. So many tens of thousands of their Astartes died trying to eliminate these last few thousand or so loyalists. And the Emperor's children in particular took massive losses. So something like half the legion was lost at Isstvan III. Partially, obviously, they were the loyalists element, but then many of the traitors themselves died in the attempt to eliminate these last loyalists, to the point where the legion was massively reduced in its effectiveness. And the other legions also took considerable damage as well. And so the effect this would then have on the wider heresy would be quite considerable. The forces available to Horus were so much more reduced than they could have been, had probably 2 things been done differently. So the first thing is, obviously, it had Sol Tarbets not worked out that something was going on, he would never have gone down to the planet to warn Loken, and then the loyalists would never have been able to hide from the virus bombing. So that was the first mistake, was allowing some of this information to get out. There are just a few things done by the traitors that were done in a way that was just too lax, and I think particularly by the Emperor's children, mainly because they had already started to fall towards chaos. I think they were a bit more blatant about what they were doing. So Tarbets was able to work out that something wasn't quite right, and then eventually found out that virus bombs were being loaded on the ship that it was on to be launched. And so that obviously gave him the final clue that there was something terrible about to happen. Now, it's important to note this time that the other 2 legions, the Death Guard and the World Eaters, hadn't started to fall to chaos. They hadn't had an exposure to chaos. They were just traitors. They had decided that the Emperor wasn't the right person to lead the Imperium, and they had decided to throw their lot in with Horus. Mortarion and Angron, neither of them were particularly neither of them particularly were looking for someone else to serve. They weren't going, "Oh, Horus is such a great guy. I should kneel to Horus and obey him and do everything I want." They would much prefer to have just been doing their own thing. They had come to the point where their hatred for the Emperor was high enough to override the fact that they didn't like taking orders from anybody, and so they were willing to throw their lot in with Horus, because he seemed like the only likely way to some form of victory over the Emperor. Whereas Fulgrim had been corrupted by chaos, and obviously so had Horus. But it wasn't as simple as that all four of them, the legions present, were corrupted by chaos. Most of the people, even within the corrupted Primarch's legions, weren't themselves corrupted or hadn't started to worship chaos, and in many ways didn't even really know what chaos was at this point. They were just being loyal to their Primarchs, and that's what it really came down to. So Isstvan III really is about loyalty to Primarch versus loyalty to Emperor. Now, the interesting thing about these four legions is they needed to purge their loyalists, because there were quite a lot of them. There were a decent number of loyalists, somewhere like a quarter to a third of each of those legions were loyalists, whereas the other traitor legions that would reveal their hand at Isstvan V and join the rebellion were actually mostly free of loyalists. So in fact, these four were really, in many ways, the most loyalist of the traitor legions, other than the Thousand Sons, who were at this point completely out of the mix. They weren't traitors in the sense that the others were. Now, of course, the other big mistake Horus makes, and really is the key one, once they've seen that the plan hasn't quite worked and that there are some loyalists who survive because they've got some warning, Angron's intervention is what causes all of the problems. If Angron doesn't go down to the surface, he doesn't send his own Astartes down to the surface to eliminate the survivors, then it's pretty simple to just eliminate everyone from orbit. But he can't resist it. It's Angron. But Horus being Horus, he should have foreseen this. It's pretty obvious that Angron's going to do something stupid, because that's what Angron does. I mean, just time after time, Angron throughout the Heresy will do this kind of thing. It's something that he's always going to do, has always done, and it's very obvious that that's what he does. And so for Horus not to think, well, if things don't go quite right, Angron is probably going to mess up my plan, is a little bit of an oversight. So if he'd only positioned Angron in a way that he couldn't react so immediately, maneuvered him to a position where maybe he's been sent to do something else somewhere else, or he's just there's lots of ways he could have made it so that Angron can't react so quickly and get down to the planet with his own troops and be a barrier to an orbital attack. It's just a major oversight on Horus' part. As a great tactical genius, one of the Empyrean's greatest war leaders of all time, and he doesn't think that the loose cannon personified that is Angron needs to be controlled in some way. The key to winning Isstvan III comfortably, and it not being a Pyrrhic victory, and having so many more troops, so much more time to then fight the heresy, is dealing with Angron before he becomes a problem. Putting him in the right place so he's not a problem, or just eliminating the information that's getting to him so he doesn't know what's going on down there. There's lots of ways it could have been done. So that is the story of Isstvan III and how Angron lost the heresy. Tell me what you think in the comments. What would you have done with Angron if you were Horus? How would you control Angron? How would you deal with him? Is he just too much of a problem? Would you just kill him before he can ruin any of your plans? Or do you keep him around as a useful asset, which, when directed in the right place, to use? Otherwise, like, subscribe and share, and I will see you next time.